we have the pleasure to start this afternoon session with Nalini Anantaraman from the Collège de France. So Nalini had many prizes, including Henri Poincaré Prize, Jacques Abon Prize, the Silver Medal of the Signaret, and I suddenly forget it later. Okay, so without any further ado, please.
Thank you to the organizers and in particular to Alice for the invitation. I'm going to talk about joint work with Laura Monk, who is now in Bristol, about the spectral gap of the Laplacian for random hyperbolic surfaces. So in my talk, X will be a compact surface of genus G. And I will put on X, I will put a hyperbolic metric. So each time I'm given a hyperbolic metric, I'll have a sequence of eigenvalues of the Laplacian. Because the surface is compact, I have a discrete sequence of eigenvalues. And I will choose the metric, the hyperbolic metric at random. So the eigenvalues become random variables. And you can ask about this sequence of random numbers. You can ask any kind of questions that you want, in particular the same kind of questions that people like to study in random matrices. But in this talk, I will be only concerned with the spectral gap. So there is the trivial eigenvalue, which is 0. And it's simple because I will always assume that my surfaces are connected. And I will be interested in lambda 1, the first non-trivial eigenvalue. And I will have to say for which probability model I work, but it will be the Weil-Petersen measure on moduli space. And I will explain. So the last time I gave this talk, I said it's work in progress, but now I feel confident enough to say that the proof is complete. I will prove that with probability when the genus goes to infinity, so I will consider the limit where the genus of the surface goes to infinity, and I will explain how to prove that with probability going to 1, the spectral gap lambda 1 is greater than 1/4 minus epsilon for any arbitrary fixed epsilon. So let me start with some motivations. Maybe, first, I should say that this number 1/4 appears here because it is the bottom of the spectrum of the Laplacian on the hyperbolic disk, which is the universal cover of my surface. And for this reason, it's the best bound that one can hope, in the sense that there is a deterministic upper bound saying that if you have a compact hyperbolic surface of genus G, then lambda 1 is always less than 1/4 plus some constants over log G. And it's not very complicated to see this. The argument goes as follows. If you have a surface of genus G, if you have a hyperbolic surface of genus G, then its area is like 4 pi G minus 1. And as a consequence, you can always find two disjoint balls of radius C log G as soon as C is less than 1/2. The reason for this is that otherwise, then the diameter of the surface would be less than log G, and it would contradict the fact that the area grows linearly in G. So once you have found these two disjoint balls, you can construct a test function on the surface which has a Rayleigh quotient less than 1/4 plus 1 over log G. And you can construct the test function as follows. It is 0 outside the union of these two balls. And inside the ball, you take, in the hyperbolic disk, you take the ball of radius C log G. You take the first Dirichlet eigenfunction. So it's a bump function. So you make two copies of this Dirichlet eigenfunction, and then you send these two copies in the surface, and you arrange that so that the integral of this test function is 0. And then the Rayleigh quotient of this test function is going to be equal to the first Dirichlet eigenvalue of a large ball in the hyperbolic disk, and you can estimate it. It converges to 1/4 when the radius goes to infinity. So 1/4 is the optimal bound that you can hope for. Maybe a second motivation is that this 1/4 is reminiscent of what is called the Selberg conjecture, which says that if you take the sequence of congruence covers of the modular surface, the non-zero eigenvalues of the Laplacian are always greater than 1/4, minus any epsilon, really greater than 1/4. So here it's a different kind of question. It's a deterministic sequence of surfaces, but it's a similar. There is a similarity. This is more a question about number theory, but still there is a similarity. And at the moment, so for n equal 1, we have the modular surface. And for n equal 1, it's known that all the eigenvalues of the Laplacian are greater than 1/4. One can show actually that it's equivalent to saying that the Riemann's zeta function has no positive zero, which can be seen from its definition, more or less. And the result is known for a finite number of n, but it's not known, so this is still an open question nowadays. But in fact, even outside of the realm of arithmetic surfaces, until 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was not even known if there exists a sequence of hyperbolic surface of drawing genus having lambda 1 greater than 1/4 minus little o of 1. It was proven a few years ago by a probabilistic method. Until before that, there was not even an example of such a sequence of surfaces. So, I mean, the probabilistic question and the number theoretical question are quite different in the techniques, but somehow it says that what people expect in the arithmetic setting is actually some kind of generic behavior. And the last motivation for us to have started this work is that there are similar questions in the case of regular graphs, random regular graphs, and there have been a lot of advances in the last 20 years. And we were hoping to take advantage of the combinatorics that people developed in the case of random graphs. So I have a few slides about random graphs. So let G be a regular graph, a finite regular graph. So it has vertices, a set of vertices V. And regular means that every vertex has the same number of neighbors that I call Q plus 1. And we are interested in the Laplacian, but for a regular graph, the Laplacian modulo some translation is just the adjacency matrix. And so I'm more going to talk about the eigenvalues of the adjacency matrix. And so in this context, so the trivial eigenvalue is Q plus 1. It corresponds to the constant eigenfunction. And it's simple if the graph is connected. And there are capital N eigenvalues if n is the number of vertices. And the analogous question to asking if lambda 1 is greater than 1/4 is to ask if mu2, the first non-trivial eigenvalue, is less than 2 square root of q, because 2 square root of q is the spectral radius of the adjacency matrix of the universal cover of the infinite q plus 1 regular tree. And for graphs, there are some results, although none of them is easy. So for instance, since the end of the 80s, there is an explicit construction due to Lubotsky, Philipp Sarnak, and to Margulis of what is called Ramanujan graphs. So this means that mu2 is less than 2 square root of q. There is such a construction not for arbitrary q, but for q a prime number or a power of a prime number. Quite recently, there has been a probabilistic construction by Marcus Spielmann and Srivastava of bipartite Ramanujan graphs with arbitrary q. Before that, it was not known if one can make Ramanujan drafts for arbitrary Q, this probabilistic construction gives an existence result. How they are bipartite drafts, but and the exact analog of the result that I stated in the first slide is called, for regular draft, is called Allen's conjecture, and it was proven by Joel Friedman 15 years ago. And Charles Bordenave gave a shorter proof, maybe 6-7 years ago. And it says the following. So you have to take a regular graph on n vertices at random, and there are several models that you can take, but let's say we take the uniform. So for a given number of vertices, you take the uniform measure on the set of all regular graphs. And the result in this setting is that when the number of, so n is the number of vertices, when it goes to infinity, with a probability going to 1, all the non-trivial eigenvalues are less in modulus than 2 square root of q plus epsilon for any positive epsilon. So we were hoping somehow to understand enough of this proof to see if some of the combinatorics can be made to work for random surfaces. And I would also like to mention a result which is also in the same spirit, but it's about random covers. It's a result by Charles Bordenave and Benoit Collins, where you start with a finite graph, and then you take Gn, which is a random n cover of G. So if you take a finite cover of a given graph, the original eigenvalues are always going to stay. But you want the result is that with probability going to 1, the spectrum of the random cover is going to be made of the original eigenvalues, and the rest is contained in the neighborhood of radius epsilon of the spectrum of the universal cover. So now let's say what is known up to now for random surfaces. So I'll mostly talk about the Weil-Petersson probability measure on moduli space, and I will describe a little more what this measure looks like. But already Mirzakhani proved the existence of a constant C, some explicit constant but not optimal, such that with probability going to 1 when the genus goes to infinity, lambda 1 is greater than C. So the question is to prove that C is as close as we want to 1/4. 3 years ago, 2 teams, Wu and Xue on the one hand and Lipnowski and Wright on the other hand, proved that actually you can take C to be 3/16 minus epsilon for any epsilon. And so this was for the Weil-Petersson probability measure, and there were some similar results for random cover models. In particular, the result by Hyde and Maggi that I quoted earlier was for random covers of a finite non-compact hyperbolic surface, finite volume non-compact hyperbolic surface. Last year with Laura, we put a result on the archive which improved the constancy to 2/9 minus epsilon. But now we think that we can go to the optimal constant, which is 1/4 minus epsilon. And you can wonder why these sequences of increments. So why first 3/16, then 2/9, and then 1/4? So actually, the method gives actually an infinite family of results. So for any integer k, we can prove that lambda 1 is greater than 1/4 minus 1/4 k plus 2 square minus epsilon. And this integer k will arise as, so we will do some asymptotic expansions of certain expectations. And k is the order to which we are able to understand the asymptotic expansion, and in particular the coefficient of order g to the k in the asymptotic expansion. So for instance, if you just do the asymptotic expansion to zeroth order, if you take k equal to 0, you get 3/16, which is what Lipnitsky Wright and Wei did. In our paper of last year, we computed explicitly the next two leading order term. So we went to k equal to 1, and that's how we obtained 2/9. But now we say that we can do the asymptotic expansion to any order and understand what the coefficient looks like, and so we can do this for any k. Let me first spend some time to say in a word about the Weil-Petersson measure. I'm just going to give a very pedestrian explanation of what the Weil-Petersson looks like. So we have a surface of genus G, topological surface. We can cut it. On the surface we can draw 3G minus 3 simple curves that cut the surface into 3 whole spheres that are also called pairs of pants in hyperbolic geometry. And there are 2G minus 2 such pieces. And it's known that for each topological pair of pants, if you are given 3 positive lengths, L1, L2, L3, this is enough to determine a unique modulo isotopy, a unique hyperbolic metric inside the pair of pants, such that the 3 boundary components are geodesics of lengths L1, L2, L3. So first, for each curve, if we are given a length Li, L2, L3G minus 3, it's already enough to determine a hyperbolic metric inside each pair of pants. And then we need additional parameters to say how we glue together the pairs of pants, and these are the parameters theta I, which are called twist parameters, and that can take positive or negative values, and that tell us how to glue together the different pieces. So we have Cg minus C parameters, so the lengths Li are positive and the angles theta I can take any value. And it's known that, so those are called Fenchel-Nielsen coordinates on the Teichmüller space. And it's known that for this, any such set of coordinates determine a unique hyperbolic metric on the surface modulo isotopy. And now if we take, if we take this number to be random, we get a random hyperbolic metric. So what is the Weil-Petersson measure? It's just the Lebel measure in those coordinates. It's a measure on the Teichmüller space. So actually, this is not the definition of the Weil-Petersson measure. It's a result due to Stott-Wolpert. Originally, the Weil-Petersson measure is defined as the volume form coming from the Weil-Petersson Kähler form. But what Stott-Wolpert proved is that for any decomposition of the surface into pairs of pants, the Weil-Petersson measure admits this very simple expression. It is always, so there are infinitely many ways of cutting the surface into pairs of pants, but you always get the Lebel measure in those coordinates, which is nice because it seems to be a simple object. However, it's an infinite measure, so we cannot do probability directly on the Teichmüller space. But instead of working on the Teichmüller space, we will work on the moduli space of hyperbolic structures, meaning that we will identify 2 hyperbolic metrics if they are isometric. So we work on the quotient space where we just want to count 1 hyperbolic structure per isometric class. So we quotient the Teichmüller space by the mapping class group, the group of diffeomorphisms, modulo isotopy. The Weil-Petersen measure is invariant by the mapping class group, so it is well defined on the quotient, and it's known that on the quotient it's a finite measure. So it means that basically the interpretation is that the only reason why it's infinite on the Teichmüller space is that we are counting infinitely many times metrics that are isometric. So we will work on the quotient space. And I will call, so we have a measure with finite mass. We'll call Vg the total mass of the moduli space. And if we divide the Weil-Petersen measure by Vg, we get a probability measure. It's quite hard to compute anything with this probability measure, and the reason is that it's a quotient space. And just to give an idea of what kind of questions, what kind of problems can arise, just remember how we integrate a function on Rn modulo Zn. So if we want to integrate a function on Rn modulo Zn, it means integrating a periodic function. We all know that we won't integrate the function on the whole Rn, we will integrate it on a cube. And the reason, and we know that it's independent on the choice of the cube, etc. And the reason for that is that the unit cube is a fundamental domain for the action of Zn on Rn. So it's the reason why it makes sense to integrate periodic function on a cube. So if we want to integrate a function on the moduli space, it means we want to integrate on the Teichmüller space, we want to integrate a function which is invariant by the mapping class group. We would need to know a fundamental domain for the action of the mapping class group, and there is no such explicitly known fundamental domain. Fortunately for us, there is what is known match chain identities. So the first such identity was found by Grade match chain, and then other people found generalizations of Mirzakhani, Luo, and Tan, Hugo Parlier. They found formulas of the following form. You can find an explicit function on the Teichmüller space. I didn't write the formula, but there are some, one can write down an explicit function having the property that, and it's a rapidly decaying function on the Teichmüller space. It has the property that if you periodize it by the action of the mapping class group, you get 1. And so it's a kind of smooth replacement for fundamental domain. And it is one of the key ingredients when you want to calculate integrals on the Teichmüller space. And it's one of the key ingredients in Mirzakhani's work. And so this is one difficulty. And the second difficulty when we want to compute integrals on the Teichmüller space is that I said that in function Nielsen coordinates, I said that the measure is the Lebesgue measure. So it means it's quite easy to calculate an integral provided that it has a simple expression in a function Nielsen coordinates. But there are many things that you would like to compute that don't have a nice expression in such coordinates. So at the present time, there are very few things that one can actually compute for this probability model. Just two short slides on the work of Mariam Mirzakhani. She obtained the following kind of formulas. So suppose on the surface we draw one simple curve, gamma, or we draw all the simple curves on the surface. We take a test function f, and suppose we want to compute the integral over the modular space of the sum of L of gamma over all. So here the random variable that we would like to integrate is the sum over all simple closed geodesics of f of the length of gamma. Suppose we want to compute this integral. What Mirzakhani showed is that this can be expressed as the integral of f of L times a certain density, which I will call V. So it depends on the genus G. And the letter S means that I'm considering simple geodesics. So this function is what is called a volume polynomial in Mirzakhani's work, because she showed that this density is actually a polynomial function, and she showed how to compute it by recursion on the genus, what is called topological recursion. And more generally, if instead of one geodesic you consider M-applet of geodesics, so suppose you want to integrate on the moduli space, you have a test function of M variable, and you want to integrate a random variable which is of the form the sum over all collections gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma m, and you ask these curves to be simple disjoint geodesics, which is what is called a multi-curve, and you want to integrate f of the length of gamma 1, length of gamma 2, length of gamma m. And Mirzakhani showed that this integral takes the form integral of L of f L1 Lm times a certain density function, which again depends on the genus. And she showed that this function is a polynomial and that it can be computed by topological recursion. So it's almost an explicit thing. It's not completely explicit, but it satisfies an induction formula, which is completely explicit. So we have this almost explicit density that helps calculating things, but as you can see, this formula really allows only to compute things that depend on disjoint simple geodesics. So now let me try to describe the proof of the result about the spectral gap. It's a method which is called the trace method, which is also quite commonly used for random graphs. And for hyperbolic surfaces, we use the Selberg trace formula. So we reparameterize the eigenvalues of the Laplacian. So lambda j are the eigenvalues of the Laplacian, but it's common to reparameterize them by putting lambda j equals 1/4 plus rj square. And in the trace formula, you have an identity between, sometimes people say it's a kind of generalization of the Poisson formula. So on the left-hand side, you have a sum which involves the eigenvalues of the Laplacian. And on the right-hand side, you have a sum that involves the length. So the sum over gamma is a sum over all periodic geodesic on the surface. And you have the length of the periodic geodesic divided by 2 hyperbolic sine of L gamma over 2. And here T is a parameter. So this is an identity between two distributions. T is a real number, and both sides are distributions. So you see on the right-hand side, you have a Dirac mass at T equal the length of the periodic geodesic gamma. And on the left-hand side, the sum is not convergent. It only converges in the sets of distributions. There is also this integral term, which doesn't depend on the metric, which is called the topological term. It is called the topological term, and so it has a factor g minus 1, which will be important in our discussion. So here I wrote it as an identity between two distributions, but if you look at textbooks, people always write it with a test function. So if you have a test function phi, and here I just integrated both sides. So on the left-hand side, you get the Fourier transform of phi. And here you get phi evaluated at the length of the geodesic gamma. And I will take a test function phi which has support in minus LL. It has to be even, so it has support in minus LL. And what is very important in the trace method is to note that the lambda j, which are smaller than 1/4, that correspond to Rj, which is purely imaginary. So it corresponds to complementary series of SL2. And if Rj is purely imaginary, actually what you have here is the Fourier transform, but it's an analytic continuation of the Fourier transform. And in particular, on the left-hand side, if there are some imaginary Rj, when now you take capital L to infinity, you will have an exponential growth. So the eigenvalues that are less than 1/4, they are responsible to an exponential growth of the left-hand side when capital L goes to infinity. So we are going to use the other direction. If we want to show the absence of eigenvalues less than 1/4, you have to show that this quantity doesn't grow exponentially when L goes to infinity. And for the moment, it's a purely deterministic reasoning. You could do it. You could argue like this for a given surface. So this is summarized here. So if there is an eigenvalue lambda less than 1/4 minus alpha square, then the Fourier transform of the test function at R1 will grow at least like exponential alpha L. And there is always this epsilon, which is arbitrarily small. After a while, I will stop writing it, but it should be everywhere. Because everywhere there are some polynomial contributions that will appear, so I will not write them. So now, if we take a random surface, we deduce that if we want that the probability that lambda 1 is less than 1/4 minus alpha square can be bounded from above by the probability that phi hat of R1 is at least exponential alpha L. And now we do something which is not optimal, but probably unavoidable, is that we do the Markov inequality. So we replace a probability by an expectation, which is called the moment method. So the probability that lambda 1 is less than 1/4 minus alpha square is bounded by the expectation of phi hat of R1 divided by exponential alpha L. And how do we bound this expectation of phi hat of R1? We assume that we have chosen a function phi with positive Fourier transform, so that the expectation of one term in the trace formula is bounded by the whole sum. And so we use the trace formula to say that the expectation of phi hat of R1 is bounded by something which now involves only the periodic geodesics. So here on the right-hand side, I have the topological term of the trace formula. It's deterministic, so it goes out of the expectation. And there is an expectation which involves all the geodesics. And here, if you see, it involves all the geodesics having length less than capital L. So conclusion, if we want to show that lambda 1, that the probability that lambda 1 is less than 1/4 minus alpha square goes to 0, it is sufficient to show that the expectation of the geometric term of the trace formula grows at most like exponential alpha L. And for the moment, I didn't really say how to choose L. I just say capital L is going to go to infinity. It is preferable to take it as small as possible because we see that on the right-hand side, we have all periodic geodesic of length less than capital L. So if we take L too large, we will have a lot of, we have too many closed geodesics, and the combinatorics is going to be untractable. So it's preferable to take capital L as small as possible. But on the other hand, if you look at these two sides, there is this topological term which, I mean, it's there and we cannot really get rid of it, and it grows like G. So if we want it to be smaller than exponential alpha L, we see that we are forced to take the length capital L at least log G over alpha. So we have to work at logarithmic scale in the genus, and if we want to take alpha as small as possible, then we will get a large constant in front of log G. Okay, so now let us try to see what we can do with this expectation of the geometric term in the trace formula. So a priori, it involves all possible periodic geodesic. But first, just to see what we are able to do, let us just look at the simple geodesic, so the ones without self-intersections. For the simple geodesic, we can use Mirzakhani's work and try to evaluate the expectation. So in the sum, we just take the simple geodesics, and Mirzakhani's work will tell us that the corresponding expectation for the simple geodesic will look as follows. So there is Mirzakhani's density function, the volume polynomial, Vg of L. And then you have to integrate a test function, which is the one coming from the trace formula. So phi divided by 2 hyperbolic sine. So we are interested in understanding this integral I when the genus goes to infinity. And by work of Mirzakhani and Petri, we know the asymptotics of the volume polynomial when the genus goes to infinity. So it's a polynomial, but when the genus goes to infinity, it starts looking more and more like this function, 2 hyperbolic sine L over 2 square. Actually, it's a polynomial which looks very much like the beginning of the asymptotic expansion of hyperbolic sine L over 2 to the square, and when the genus goes to infinity, you add more and more terms in the sum. So I put this asymptotic in the integral. There is something funny happening, is that this hyperbolic sine L over 2 square, there is one simplification with the one which comes from the Selbert trace formula, but there is still one that stays. And so we see that when capital L goes to infinity, the contribution of the simple geodesic to the expectation will be in exponential capital L over 2, which is not what we wanted, because we wanted a sub-exponential behavior. But the reason actually is quite simple. It comes from the trivial eigenvalue. Because if you remember, we always have lambda 0 equals 0. And lambda 0 equals 0 corresponds to R0 equals plus or minus I over 2. So on the spectral side of the trace formula, there is also a term which behaves like exponential L over 2. So this term appears on both sides, and we have to see how to cancel it. And this is actually what Lipnowski, Wright, and Wu Hui did to first order. They really computed explicitly the coefficient in front of this exponential term on both sides, and they saw that it cancels. And so, but they just did it to first order. And we are going to do something different to kill. So we see that the problem seems to come from the trivial eigenvalue. So we decide and first, I mean, it was quite experimental. We decided to see what happens if, on the spectral side, we choose a test function whose Fourier transform vanishes at lambda 0 equals 0, just to see what happens. And how to choose such a test function? There are many choices, but we just multiply the Fourier transform by 1/4 plus r squared to some power, because we are sure that it will kill. We are sure that it will kill this term, and let's just try what happens. Let's just see what happens if we do that. So on the side of the Fourier transform, we multiply by 1/4 plus r squared to some power m. It means that we multiply that to the function phi, we apply a differential operator. And this differential operator is the one written here. It's 1/4 minus d squared. So we do exactly the same calculation as before, but we just modify the test function by applying this differential operator. So again, let us look just at the contribution of simple geodesics. It's the same calculation as before, but now the test function is multiplied by this differential operator. So again, we replace the Mirzakhani volume polynomial by its main asymptotic when g goes to infinity. And now we get that the contribution of simple geodesics is the integral over r plus of always this hyperbolic sign L over 2. But now the test function is d to the m applied to phi. And we can do integration by parts, because this differential operator is symmetric. And so we put it on, so here at this step, it is enough to take, for this step, it is equal to take m equal 1. And when it hits the hyperbolic sign is in the, I recall what is d is 1/4 minus d squared. It is in the kernel of this operator. But we don't get 0 because there is a boundary term coming from the fact that the integral is from 0 to infinity. But we get some bounded contribution. So it looks very nice because we see that we have killed the trivial eigenvalue on one side and we have killed the contribution of simple geodesics on the other side. So this was 5 years ago. And now we need to, so what do we need to do? So first I did something not completely correct. I replaced the volume polynomial by its leading order contribution. But when you want to do an integration by parts, you cannot do that because your differential operator is going to hit also the remainder terms. So we need to refine this estimate. Actually, what we will do is do a full asymptotic expansion to any order in negative powers of the genus. But we also need to do non-simple geodesics. And we need to be able to sum all our estimates over all possible topologies of periodic geodesics. So first we introduced a notion which is called, I'm not going to give a very formal definition, but it's called a topological type of periodic geodesic. A topological type of periodic geodesic is just a picture telling you what your geodesic looks like. So these are three different topological types. So actually it's not just a curve, it's a curve and a small neighborhood of the curve in the surface, because you have to encode the information of when there are intersections, you have to encode the orientation. So for instance, the number 2 and number 3 are two different topological types. And we showed the following. So if you fix a topological type, so not necessarily simple, so any topological type, and now you want to integrate over the moduli space a random variable which is of the following form. You have a test function f, and you want to integrate the sum over all geodesics having the topological type that you have chosen, f of the length of the geodesic. First, one can show that there is a density given the result. So the result is of the form integral of f of L times some density, which depends on the genus and on the topological type. So this is not very surprising, the fact that there is a density. It's because the Weil-Petersen measure is a smooth measure, and the length of a periodic geodesic in coordinates is an analytic function. So you just push forward a smooth measure by an analytic function. And for simple curves, I said that this density is a polynomial. I think it's probably not the case in general. In general, not much is known about these densities for a fixed genus, but we can say something when the genus goes to infinity. We can say that when the density divided by the total volume has an asymptotic expansion in inverse power of the genus, and the coefficients are some functions of L that depends on the order of the asymptotic expansion and on the topology. And the main fact that is behind the proof of the 1/4 spectral gap is the fact that we can say that these coefficients have a very spatial structure. And this structure appeared already in Friedman's work about random regular graphs. He called them Ramanujan functions. Now we call them Friedman-Ramanujan functions because we think actually it's more his idea than Ramanujan's idea. So the structure of this function is as follows. There is a term which is of the form exponential L times a polynomial in L. And then there is another term which is big O of exponential L over 2 times a polynomial. Okay, so it's really this jump. So there is a leading term which is exactly exponential L times polynomial, and then there is a jump of a factor 2 in the error term. And I think I'm not going to do the calculation in detail, but if you have this structure, you are going to be able to do the same kind of integration by part as the one I showed. Because when you put this in the trace formula, there is this factor which, like 1 over hyperbolic sine L over 2. So you are going to divide this function by this. So basically, you are going to multiply by exponential minus L over 2. So this term here, in the error term, you're just going to have a polynomial contribution. And in the main term, is going to change the exponential L to exponential L over 2. And this term is going to be killed by a sufficiently high power of the differential operator. Okay, now see if you take powers of, if you take this operator d to the power m plus 1, it kills all the functions which are of the form exponential L over 2 times a polynomial of degree m. So the same kind of integration by part is going to happen, and I'm not doing it in front of you, but it leads to the following estimate, that if we fixed one topology of geodesic, or a finite number of topologies of geodesic, if you consider in the trace formula, if you consider the expectation corresponding to all the geodesics having this topology, and if you put a test function in the image of d to the m for sufficiently large m, then the only term that is going to remain is the remainder term in the asymptotic expansion. So it should be done in the following order. You fix an integer k, which is the order to which you are ready to do your asymptotic expansion. So you fix an integer k and you fix a topology of geodesic. Then you will get a finite number of polynomials. And then you choose m accordingly to kill all these polynomials. And then you will see that for the corresponding term in the expectation of the trace formula will be bounded by exponential capital L over 2 over g to the power k plus 1. So it's only the contribution from the remainder term in your expansion. And then there is some polynomial term which comes from the boundary terms. So it looks quite good, but this is just when we have summed over a fixed topology. Now it's no longer a simple geodesic, but it's a fixed topology. So for instance, we have decided, for instance, to sum over all geodesics looking like this. And je pense qu'il est cassé. Ouais, mais il tient pas du tout. Je vais le tenir à la main, ça va peut-être.
Comment on va faire? Il faut juste mettre en...
Mais la vis, elle n'a pas l'air de tenir du tout.
Non, ça va bien. C'est que ça, c'est trop léger.
D'habitude, il y a un ressort.
Vous pouvez les passer sous le pull.
C'était comme ça qu'on l'avait mis au début.
Vous passez...
Au début, on l'avait mis comme ça. Okay, so now the problem is that we need to take into account not a finite number of topologies, but all possible topologies. And here there is a real problem that already Joel Friedman met for random graphs, is that even if you have such an estimate for every topology, when you sum over all topologies, the sum doesn't converge. There is really a problem. But fortunately, he managed to really, for graphs, he managed to identify the source of the problem, and we were able to see that it's the same problem for surfaces. The problem is that there is a set of surfaces of small but non-zero probability, which is responsible for failure of the moment method. So at one point I said we have a probability and we estimate it by an expectation. But when you do that, there is a risk that there is a set of small probability where the expectation is actually very large. And this is what happened. There is a set of, and it's a very well identified set of surfaces which has a small lambda 1 and which has some certain geometric patterns which are called tangles. It's a term that we borrowed from Joel Friedman. And it turns out that if you remove this set of surfaces, so you condition on the complement, so it's going to modify your expectation, but it's not going to modify the notion of probability going to 0 or 1. And if you remove this small set of surfaces, which is the source of the problem, it turns out that it solves. It does the job. So yes. What Monk and Thomas did is to really adapt the notion of tangle-free graphs that Friedman had. Actually, they took more the version by Charles Bordenave. Because Charles Bordenave also, in his work about random regular graphs, he also had the notion of tangles, which was different from Friedman's, and it's really a notion. The notion that we use is more adapted from Bordenave's paper. So we do what I did, but by conditioning all the expectation on the set of tangle-free surfaces. And once we do that, the sum over infinitely many topologies, which is the first line, one can show that it's reduced to a sum over a very small number of geodesics. Not finite, but logarithmic in the genus. So in the second line, the number of terms is like log of G. So we have gotten rid of the problem of having too many topologies, but now we have this indicator function, which doesn't look good because when we want to, first, all the formulas by Mirzakhani, they are completely ruined if we put an indicator function. And second, if we want to do an integration by parts, it's a problem also to have modified the measure. But one step that I'm not going to detail at all, this indicator function, we replace it by some inclusion-exclusion formula. So we replace it by an infinite alternating sum, and we can actually we can show that after we can show that everything that I said remains true after introducing this indicator function. So it is still true that this expectation is less than exponential capital L over 2 over G to the power k plus 1, and I think it will be time to conclude. So let me just say how we choose the parameters at the end. So suppose that you believe me that we have obtained that the expectation of phi hat of R1. So there is one term which is exponential capital L over 2 divided by J to the power k plus 1, but there is always the topological term, which is linear in G. So now, if we want to match the two terms, we see that we have to take the length. So, and we want to show that it's less than exponential alpha L. So we choose L, capital L, so that the two terms match. And it amounts to taking capital L equals 2k plus 2 log G. And k is the order to which we are ready to do the asymptotic expansion, but I said that now we can do it to any order if we wish. And then we see that what we have obtained is less than exponential alpha L, and alpha is going to be 1. Alpha is 1 over 2. Alpha is the inverse of the coefficient in front of capital L. So alpha is going to be 1 over 2k plus 2. And if you still have in mind the whole process, it implies that the probability that lambda 1 is less than 1/4 minus alpha squared goes to 0. Okay, and I think I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.